Hello everyone, and it is June 23rd, so the first major content patch is out, The Chained God. I am very, very excited for this. I hope you guys are too. There is a lot of stuff that they released, and I'm excited to kind of go over it and kind of give my take on some of the updates. And I'm, of course, going to go over all the stuff, but I know sort of my main thing is the balance stuff, because how I think this is going to affect builds and runs and, the kind of stuff I make my content around. But before I get into that, the main thing I'm actually the most excited for is this seasonal content, The Chained God. It is, as you can see here, a short standalone campaign. There's no campaign management, like the hospice and, injuries, that kind of stuff. It's just a series of sort of skirmish missions is how they described it. I haven't got a chance to play any of this firsthand yet, by the way. But you get to play as a Fomorian, which I think is just super cool. They said basically this does tie into the main story to kind of explain how Baylor sets himself free towards the end of the game. So I'm really cool to see how all of that kind of works in together narratively. I did really enjoy the story. So I think that's super cool. They're adding a bunch of seasonal missions. These seasonal missions you can see they talk about here for the revamped endgame, which I am also pretty stoked about. They are now more Fomorian focused, which I liked. I felt like the old endgame was actually very Lost focused. So now 12 of the 20 endgame missions are Fomorian, with 8 being a sort of mixed variety. I do like this. I do like fighting the Fomorians, these sort of like bruisers, these just meat slabs of enemies. I feel like we didn't get a chance to fight them enough, so I like this. And you can still access the old endgame missions if you have saves that were there before this patch came out, but they have included that you can access the new endgame as well. They have like a separate menu here to load your saves into the old endgame or into the new endgame. And then on top of this, they buffed the 3 endgame bosses, King Brez, Great Worm, and Baylor. So I'm also a fan for this. They did feel a little too easy, especially Baylor. King Brez I actually thought was the toughest of the 3 of them. So I think it's appropriate that Baylor be the strongest of them. So hopefully this rebalancing does kind of put him over towards the top. The last thing they sort of revamped about the endgame is they did lower enemy damage, but did increase their health. I think this is a decent way to go, because there was a number of players that thought that endgame was a little too easy because you get so powerful by the endgame. And I'm sure you've seen it with some of my build videos where if you really get a build really refined and on point, you can just really sort of demolish the enemies before they have a chance to really do much. But at the same time, if they do get a chance to do something, they can really hurt. They can hit you back hard. So it almost really sort of incentivizes this sort of playstyle to just try and murder them before they can do anything. So I think by lowering the damage, it makes it less punishing when you can't pull off these like one-turn sweeps on them. But at the same time, it makes it harder to pull off the one-turn sweeps, which I don't think is necessarily a bad thing. I think combat taking, 4 turns instead of like 2 in some cases, if you really have these nasty builds going, isn't a huge thing. I'm sure some players may not like this. A lot of players like it when anything sort of kind of gets balanced out of the player's favor. But I like this. I'm a more hardcore kind of player. I like playing on the really high difficulties and really like testing my skill, so I don't think this is really bad. They added some new seasonal mechanics, so these will only apply to the seasonal missions. This won't be popping up during, your main story missions, Act 1, 2, 3, 4, to my understanding. You can now get soul fragments from killing Fomorians during these seasonal missions. When they die, they drop a soul, and you need to move a unit over that soul to carry it, but it will then debuff the hero that picked it up, and they do expire after 2 turns, and they do expire if the the fight ends, and you didn't pick it up. If you kill a Fomorian, and killing that Fomorian ends the fight, you will automatically pick up that soul. And you use these souls for this soul merchant that's being put into Camelot, who will have 20 plus new seasonal relics. So I'm super excited to see what these relics are and see what kind of crazy stuff we can build around with them. And this line here really grabs my attention. You have some unique relics that can scale up in strength as you get more Spire Shards. I'll circle back to that in a second. It says the stock does not refresh. All of the items are visible from the start. I love this because just here's what I got, here's what you can get. That's it. You don't need to worry about cycling through the stock like the Merchant or the Enchanted Tower. You can plan what you want to target from the very beginning. The Spires here, it says you may encounter these on missions, so I don't know if this is like a random proc chance or if they're just set to spawn on certain missions. I'm hoping this just means that they're not going to be on every mission, but they're not RNG spawned. That wouldn't really make much sense to me. The Spires conjure powerful hurricanes. If you've gotten later into the game, you'll recognize this. The Fomorian spellcasters have this same spell. Basically, just means you need to move away, or this hurricane will move over your hero and start damaging them. And then destroying the Spire gets a Spire Shard, which you then use at the Soul Merchant. This was actually announced a few days ago. In case you didn't hear about it, this is pretty big. They reduced the storage space requirement. This line here says more than %. It doesn't give the actual percentage, which is kind of weird, but I can go ahead and tell you because they included it on their original announcement. They said it roughly takes up 70 gigabytes less space, so that's more than half. That's around 60%, which is obviously huge. The file size was a big issue for a lot of people, and it caused some like loading issues, and obviously had a huge install time, so that's great. Bringing it down to about 50 gigabytes, because the original size was around 120, is much more in line with, other games. So it is on GeForce now, for any of you that use GeForce. This was also announced a while ago. They've just kind of been waiting for GeForce to actually add it. They don't really get control over when it gets added, just that it's going to. So it sounds like it is officially on GeForce as well. They have a voice actor for Baylor, Cone Carnage, a Twitch streamer. A lot of people thought this was super cool when they announced it in the Discord. I'm sorry, I've never heard of this guy. His face is kind of familiar though. But if you're a fan of him, that's really cool. They added difficulty levels to roguelite mode now, which is more of that Iron Man mode. You can now play it on any of the difficulties. You don't need to do it on just hard mode. But whatever difficulty you choose at the start, that's it for the entire run. Some miscellaneous stuff, they made it so it's easier to tell when enemies have a shield and will be blocking incoming damage. You can now cancel the respec for the training ground. They added some more translations to localization, and they added a description to the Suri Vane mission where you can't manually save during it. People were reporting this thinking it's a bug, but apparently that is intentional. Be careful when you go into his mission, I guess. And now finally, the main thing that I know a lot of people care about, and sort of my main thing, is the balance changes. First at the top, you can see rebalance for the Vanguard, something that they desperately needed, I think. I know, again, I sort of mentioned this before, a lot of players hate it when anything gets nerfed, especially for a primarily single-player game, but my stance is the game and its artistic vision is intended to have a certain level of difficulty by the devs. The devs created this experience. They think the experience is best within certain confines, so if there's something in the game that trivializes everything and just makes the game on easy mode, no matter what difficulty you're on, that's no longer a part of their artistic vision, and I think they do have the right to put things more in line with that. And for myself and lots of other players, they do think it makes the game less fun when there is these sort of things that just kind of break the game. It's easy to say, well, just don't use it then, or just play around it. And I mean, creating these artificial challenges for yourself, some players aren't going to do that, is the thing. And then they may unintentionally, they just will use whatever's the best thing on hand, and then potentially reduce their own experience. It's like, wow, this game was really easy. I just used Vanguard and stab everything. Well, it was okay. Not every player is going to do these things. So if you're one of those players that is extremely anti-nerf and you're just like, nope, game's dead now to me, moving on to something else, I'm sorry to hear it. I just ask that you just maybe please take a breath, try the game after the changes, and you may realize it's not that bad. I heard there was a number of players that sort of said the same thing to me, in the comments, in the Discord, in the Reddit. when they nerfed Vanguard and Champion during the 1.1 patch. And honestly, I mean, I liked those nerfs too, and I honestly think the game was in a much better state after those nerfs than it was before for just overall balance and enjoyment for the average player. Like, players that came in after patch 1.1 didn't even notice, like, yeah, no, this works great. These characters are still super strong. So, enough about that. I'm just going to talk about the balance changes now. One of the biggest problems I always said was surprise damage. It is vastly stronger than backstabs and anything else. Like, it was just absurd damage bonus. So the default surprise damage has been lowered to 30% from 50%, which is good. 30% is still very significant. You're doing essentially a third more damage. And additionally, their surprise damage while in hidden state has been lowered from 50% to 20%. This pertains to their upgrade that they get from the hide ability. So now instead of doing 100% more damage, they're doing 50% more damage. It's essentially a overall nerf by half. And I do get that is a lot. It sounds like a lot. But if you really take into consideration how much damage they're going to practically still be doing after that with this 50%, it is still huge. This hidden bonus was enabling them to do like 400 damage with, you know, some crazy builds out there in one attack. And yeah, honestly, I'm going to say that's too much. If you're one-shotting 90% of the enemies, I'm not a big fan of that. So now doing 200 damage per swing, that's still a huge amount of damage. So, right? I mean, I don't think that's a big deal. Backstab has also been lowered from 30% to 15%, and the upgrade from 20% to 15%. So, for a total of 50% to 30%, that's a smaller nerf than the other one, which I think is fair, because backstab is still very strong in general, and wasn't the biggest problem. The surprise bonus I always said was the bigger problem, but their backstab was also still noticeably brutal. So I'm a fan of this overall. We'll see how it goes. If all of a sudden they are super undertuned, I'm sure they'll get buffed back up. But I understand looking at some of these percentages, it may look a bit scary. I will test with them pretty thoroughly, and I'm sure it'll be fine. There's tons of gear that provides bonuses to backstab and surprise that every player is going to be taking anyways, and I guarantee you it will help compensate a lot for this, and you really will not feel like suddenly your Vanguard is super weak. Various items granting surprise damage have been moderately nerfed. They didn't mention backstab, just surprise. So this probably has to do with the formula with how they calculate damage, because they apply at the beginning. So I'll take a look at some items. I have a couple in some of my old saves that I can use this to compare. I'm definitely going to be doing a video later on where I kind of go more in depth about the Vanguard. And you can see the comment here, their reasoning for this, and I agree with it. Vanguard's late game got absurd. They were easily dealing 3 to 4 times the damage that other classes were able to. These nerfs aim to mitigate that while keeping the early to mid levels of the class intact. And like I said, I think that's fair. A lot of these changes are largely going to be their crazy endgame damage. You will not suddenly be like, well, now Balin is completely useless in Act 1. No, that is not going to be the case. So you can see with their own testing, Vanguards are still apparently the highest damage class, still about 50% higher than Champions. And I mean, their damage is less, but they're still the strongest, which I think is fair. There's going to be a strongest class. They're much more frail than Champions, so I think this is a fair difference. About 50% higher in the late game. Still plenty of damage you can do. They rebalanced the demonic possession tag to be less potent. I think the Morgana mission was mostly fine after the last nerf to this, but a lot of players are still struggling with that Red Knight mission if you're doing a rightful alignment run. So I think this is primarily aimed at that mission, because there's a lot of dudes you have to fight, and they hit really hard. So I think that's a good thing. I think a lot of players are going to appreciate that. The next one is various endgame maps have been improved from a balance perspective. This can kind of mean a lot of things, so I'm not really sure what to say or give a take on this. You can see they go a little more into depth about the endgame enemies being rebalanced. Maybe this is sort of feeding off of that first line, or just one of the things they mentioned in the beginning, how damage numbers have been scaled down, but armor, AP numbers, vitality have been turned up. So now they're harder to kill, and they can do more actions on their turn. So if anything, I think this makes your debuffs more important. You're going to want to be bringing people that can apply chill, that can apply shock, people that can apply slows, things like that. They buffed Marksman's poison bomb, so the minimum range is now 2 instead of 3. Okay. It's something, technically. Lady Morgana's Glacial Strike ability, I'm not sure if many of you noticed, but it actually targeted against physical debuff resist instead of mental, like pretty much every other spell in the game. Now it's mental to be in line with them, so... The Vanguard Sprint skill, which is basically just the bed of your skill, now he will end his turn and hide if you use Sprint, assuming he meets the conditions for it, meaning he's not within anyone's detect range and he has the 1/2 AP for it. That's a great upgrade for this ability. Would have maybe liked to see a little more on this. Fire Drake received a range tag, so now it's actually got a buff. It can receive bonuses from gear that applies bonuses to ranged attacks, so a buff for Merlin's damage. They nerfed an enemy. The Glowing Sphere Zap skill no longer ignores armor on heroes. So the Glowing Spheres, I believe, are those things that like the Summer Queens or Summer Witches, whatever they're called, summon. And the Burrowed Queen's Bite skill no longer stuns your heroes. This is great because this ability had like a 1 or 2 turn cooldown and could really stun lock some of your heroes, and in late game that is super brutal. So I'm glad they got rid of that. My thoughts on the bounce changes as a whole. I'm really glad they nerfed Vanguard. That was probably the biggest problem. But the second biggest problem was Marksman's needing a buff, and they didn't get that here. So I'm actually pretty disappointed about that. Maybe they just couldn't fit it in time, and they have like a smaller patch coming out later with some more of these like types of balance changes, because admittedly, the Marksman needed a lot of work, and there's a lot of other stuff they were working on. So I am hopeful it will come out relatively soon. They just couldn't fit it into this patch because the game definitely needed the content update. So just a little slight edit, some information I ran into after I finished recording the other stuff, so Max from the future. But apparently there's no skill upgrades with the Marksman, but apparently the devs have stated in the official Discord that a lot of the new items they added are like much stronger than a lot of the previous Marksman items, so Marksmen are kind of getting a buff in the form of just having much stronger gear now that they can access, so that's cool, that's exciting. Definitely gonna check that out, and I'll probably have an update video seeing how effective this gear is. Does it really help the Marksman, by how much, etc. So I just wanted to put that in to kind of walk back some of the other worries I had. I am still concerned. I do wish Marksman got some skill tree upgrades, but if the devs put in some super good gear for them, I just want to include that they aren't being neglected entirely like it may seem from the patch notes originally. There is something that they did get, and I want to give props where props are due. Good on you, devs. This is at least a start. What they did to Vanguards, I am for. Sprint, that got buffed, which is good, but I was also definitely hoping to see some buffs to traps, so that's also kind of disappointing. I'm hoping that they just have like a balance patch coming out, kind of like 1.1. That's primarily what the 1.1 patch was a balance patch, so I'm hoping they have like a, I don't know, what would this be, like 2.1 or something, or 1.3? I hope they have another balance patch coming out soon to address traps from Vanguards. I would like to see them get buffed in that regard. And yeah, the Marksman buff. The last section is a lot of bug fixes and skill bug fixes. I'm not gonna go over this line by line as there is a lot here, and this video is already running a bit longer than I kind of wanted it to. But I'll go ahead and scroll down. You can pause and read this for yourself, or you can just click the link on the Steam and read these yourself. But they fixed a lot of stuff. I can see one of the main ones up here where the Excalibur trait being removed from Sir Mordred is now fixed, which is good, and now gives him a 10% buff. I think that's a good step in the right direction for him. It says fix the Tome of Release. I'm pretty sure that's the tome that has to do with negative traits and removing them so they don't come back or something. So that's good. But yeah, I'm not really gonna go fully into this. They fixed a bunch of skills, which is obviously cool. Some skills weren't acting appropriately. They actually did get a buff with Vanguard here, you'll notice. The Vanguard Strikes was fixed. So now, originally, when you click Strike, both swings calculated whatever statuses the target had at the same time. So now, the first strike will apply things like, poison or vulnerability or whatever, which will then make the second swing do more damage if you have buffs synergizing off that. Beforehand, it was just both would hit for 70, and then they would be affected by poison or vulnerability or bleed or whatever. Now its first one sets the stats, and the second one will get the bonus damage off of it. So there is a little small Vanguard buff in here, so that is useful. There is a bit of a nerf to Sir Tristan's Smoke Bomb in here, and I did mention when I have ever talked about this skill how it does mess with the AI. When you use Smoke Bomb, the enemies end up running at you, the archers, because they thought you were just out of range. Now they go into Overwatch, so this is a good defensive skill, but it no longer really breaks the AI, so the skill is not as good anymore, but still decent. And then it looks like there's just a number of other fixes in here, nothing super major, I think, standing out to me. That's it for my review of the patch notes. Like I said, there's all this you can read about, yourself. The link is, through Steam, which is where everyone is playing the game. My overall thoughts is I am very excited for the Chained God mission. I'm very excited to see what kind of content update this is. I'm excited for the revamped endgame. That's huge. I love playing in the endgame and checking out what all this Fomorian soul stuff is. That's pretty cool. Super excited for the reduced storage. And the balance, though I think it had one really good important change, I am a little underwhelmed by the balance changes. I think that the nerf to Vanguard was good and necessary, but I would have liked to see buffs come along with it. Again, hopefully soon, as I would really like to start using Marksman more. They're fun. I like Marksman. I know a lot of players like Marksman. They are fun to use. They're satisfying. They have that nice little twang sound when you shoot someone. But they just really start to fall off pretty hard into the endgame. Overall, I am pretty happy and excited for the patch, and I am very excited to see what else is to come in the future, and I hope you guys are too, and I hope none of you are too upset with the sort of balance change portion that definitely felt like the weakest section of this patch. But that wraps it up for me, and as usual, thanks for watching.